Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So this video is going to be about my emergency room rotation. I graduated in 2021, but I really do remember this rotation very well because it was one of my most enjoyable ones. The ER that I was at was also, I think it was a Catholic hospital. And funny enough, I used to work in the medical building that was attached to that hospital. So it was a familiar place for me, and it was kind of a full circle moment because I got my hours to get into PA school at the medical building at a neurosurgery and spine surgery clinic there. So the ER rotation, the way it was done is that there were usually 2 or 3 students at a time kind of rotating on that day, and it was PA students and medical students. Then you would also have residents who were just rotating through the emergency room for their emergency rotations for residency. The emergency room was operated by physicians, and they also had PAs. The ER kind of group that ran that ER also ran a few other ERs. So I actually had one of the ER physicians who was there looked so familiar, and I had found out that I actually had met him at another emergency room a year prior. So that was kind of cool. The ER physicians were the main ones who were precepting us. And honestly, almost each and every single one of them was incredible. It was such a range of personalities. You had the really serious ones. You had the ones that loved teaching. You had the ones that who were younger and funnier. You had the ones who, it was just such different personalities. But the one thing that remained the same across all of them is that they really did value teaching. And I later learned that that was kind of part of their kind of the foundation of their group. When they founded it, is that they really wanted to be teaching students. So I appreciated it because it's nice to be a student with preceptors who want to teach you. That's really nice. And you'd think, like, obviously all preceptors sign up to teach, but some of them, it almost seems like it's like they're mad that they have students. But you could tell that they were very much invested in our education. They wanted us to try things. They wanted us to ask questions. They were really cool about it. I'm going to give a few of them were some of my favorite preceptors, but one in particular, I won't say her name actually. She was probably in her like late 50s, early 60s at this point. She was awesome. She was so sweet, and one thing I really appreciate about her is she would always push me to in seeing patients. So how did it go? We were on a rotating schedule, and the physicians and PAs are also on a rotating schedule. So sometimes it would be a morning shift, sometimes it was afternoon, sometimes it was evening. It rotated. We would come in, we would kind of get our assignments, and the physician would actually tell us who to go to. And really, in the emergency department, if they've not been at that hospital or they're not at a primary care who's connected to that hospital, you don't have much history. You have their age, you have, sometimes the medical conditions that they told the inputting nurse that they have, medications that they remembered. So you're really limited in the information you get, because it's either you hope that they remembered to give the correct history to the nurse who brought them in and admitted them, and you have the chief complaint. And so, I would go and I would see the patient first, and I would introduce myself. I would get the history. I would do a physical exam, and I would come back and I would present it to the physician. Usually I was mainly with physician. At that point, physician would ask, well, okay, what are you thinking? What are some things that are coming up? What's your differential, right? And it's like, okay, and now what do you want to do? What kind of testing do you want to get? What kind of blood tests do you want to order? And, we'd order the tests and we do these things, and then you're waiting, and then the results come back, and you'd analyze the result, and you'd say, okay, what can you tell from these labs? Or what is this chest x-ray looking like? Or what is this EKG looking like? And the nice thing is they're teaching you, well, here's something you might have missed on the chest x-ray, or this is, one of the lab tests that sometimes isn't always ordered, but this is what it tells us in this situation. Right. And so it's like you have a chest pain patient. What are the things you're thinking about for chest pain? Obviously, myocardial infarction. Is this an aortic dissection? Is it a pulmonary embolism? Is it a trauma to the area? Is it just GERD? There's so many different things it could be. What kind of labs do you want to order? Obviously, we need to order tropes, and we need to get an EKG, and we want to do a chest x-ray, and we want to get basic bloods, right? There are lots of different things that you're constantly thinking about. And it was so cool to just get a sense of what it is that could be causing like this patient's symptoms, and in the way that these physicians who had been doing this for a lot of them for decades at this point were able to work through whether this patient was going to be, you know, a lower acuity or whether this patient was going to be a higher acuity, even if it was the same chief complaint, who was more likely to have something serious. There's one situation I remember where I was just like, I was kind of awestruck because I was like, this is really cool. And it's the art of physical exam. So I remember having a patient, she was just kind of describing how tired she was and, God, like, I'm trying to remember, like, it just, she felt out of sorts. She didn't really feel sick. She was giving very generic answers. And I go to the attending, who was the sweetest one, and he was the head, by the way. He was one of the founders of that group, and I was just like, I'm going to be honest, I really don't know what's going on with this patient. She wasn't giving me many answers. And so he comes in, introduces himself. He's super sweet. He's listening to her heart. He's listening, you know, listening to her lungs, doing the basic exam. And then he goes and he pulls her eyes and her eyelid, and he looks at her conjunctiva and realizes there's paleness. And he says, we're going to order a CBC to check her hemoglobin. Come to find out, her hemoglobin's really low. They do a fecal occult blood test, find she's bleeding. At this point, this woman probably, from the level of bleeding that she was having, it was a long-term bleed, so it could have been a multitude of things. Could have been like a bleeding peptic ulcer that she's had for a very long time, but she has some sort of GI bleed. Obviously, the worst thing to think about in this case was colon cancer. And I was just so, honestly, I was amazed because I was like, wow, from that one single physical exam finding, he was able to figure it out. Now, obviously, as a PA now, fatigue and blood loss, you know, low hemoglobin, anemia is very much correlated. But I was still a student at that time, so it was just so cool to me. What else? The nice thing about the ER is you see a multitude of different types of chief complaints. You see all different types of severity. You see very basic, you know, treatable sore throat, strep throat. I remember there was a paronychia, right? Things that could easily be taken care at urgent care. But then you also see traumas, and this was also a time where like patients were coming in with the virus, whose name I'm not going to say, and you're seeing them. It was really sad actually to really see those patients decompensating, and some of them actually very young. Patients who had broken bones, right? And I remember like this, one of the first times that I saw the fat pad sign for a radial head fracture was there. It was in the emergency room. You couldn't see the fracture, but you could see that. And we find out that this young lady who was just having a play fight with her brother, and he kind of threw her down a little too violently, ended up breaking her elbow. So it was just really cool. Obviously, you get like the typical chest pains, abdominal pains. You start to see the appendicitis and the pancreatitis and the possible MIs. And, you know, it can be a really sad place. But I also am reminded of how important that experience is, because no matter where you're at in medicine, being able to figure out acuity is going to be super important. So what else can I think about? They were really nice about letting us take our lunch break. It was really very much just, you know, when you're in between patients, you can go and grab your food. The thing about the ER system is you never know when someone's going to come in. So they had multiple providers. I mean, when I think I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, anywhere from like 6 to 8 providers at once. And so someone was always picking up a patient, like no patient was left behind. You could always transfer patients. They would speak amongst one another. You know, the PAs always were able to go to their attending physicians and ask questions if they had questions. Yeah, and so it was just a really great dynamic, and there was a lot of teamwork and a lot of synergy, and you could tell that just was the culture of that group. That might not be your experience everywhere, but when I think about it, I think a lot of people had a pretty decent emergency room experience. And this is one of the stereotypes about ER. It's really exciting until a lot of the ER attendings and preceptors want you to be excited about it, right? Because they get to see all the cool things coming in. So that was something that I definitely saw as a shared experience with a lot of my other classmates who had their ER rotation. And so, yeah, that was probably one of my favorite rotations. ER is definitely something I would consider in the future with being in urgent care. Is very much a close step to that. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. The next rotation I am going to do is probably going to be my pediatric and OBGYN. So stay tuned for that video.